Good afternoon, members, and now we'll go to leaders' questions. Deputy MaryLouMcDonald.
Good morning. So, Taoiseach, another day and another revelation of government waste of public money. Over the weekend, it emerged that in 2017, the National Gallery purchased a scanner at a cost to the taxpayer of nearly €125,000. The scanner, as you know, has never been used because a suitable room couldn't be found to accommodate it. So this equipment that cost the people €125,000 has sat idle for 8 years. Of course, this wasn't a once-off. You'll recall, I'm sure, that in 2018 the government purchased a printer for the Oireachtas to the tune of €800,000. And that printer lay idle for 10 months because it couldn't fit into the building. Eventually, a further €230,000 of public money had to be spent on works to the building to get the equipment in. What are people to make of all of this, Taoiseach? Government waste of public money is not a recent phenomenon, far from it. A government culture of waste and incompetence is deep-rooted. It's been going on for a very long time. We hear infuriating example of taxpayers' money squandered and nothing done about it. It's revelation of waste after revelation of waste. The public might well ask, what's coming next and where does all of this end? This week, it's the scanner that hasn't been used. Add to that the €366,000 bike shed, the €1.4 million security hut, €9 million for phone pouches, nearly €500,000 on a perimeter wall. The list of government scandalous waste of public money is as long as your arm, and yet no one, not a single person, has been held to account. In this government culture of waste and incompetence, it seems nobody is responsible. Taoiseach, where is the proper government oversight of how public money is spent? Where are the checks and balances and reporting within public procurement processes for which government is responsible? How is this allowed to happen time and time again? Government can feign anger. You can say that this has nothing to do with you. You can blame the National Gallery. You can point the finger at anybody and everybody under the sun for the most expensive bike shed, security hut, perimeter wall. But let's be clear, the buck stops with you, with government. You're in charge, and it's your responsibility to ensure that public money is spent wisely and properly, and, Taoiseach, to take corrective action when it's not. I think ordinary people see this for what it is. Government either knows about waste of public money and does nothing about it, or doesn't know at all and is grossly incompetent. Maybe it's a bit of both. Níl sa scanner €125,000 nar úsáideach riamh, a cabadal eile is scéile fadar an rialtas faoi cuireadh airgid an phobal. Ní féidir leanach do raig mar seo, agus tá contosacht ag tastal. Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, it seems, is furious. You appear to be bewildered by the whole thing. But you, the government, must give an explanation for the serial wastage of public money. Can I ask you, Taoiseach, was this matter raised and discussed at Cabinet today? And what do you propose to do about this latest episode of scandalous waste?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Well, I do support a hochta, I think, Anthony Galera, institute on a hochtach on gallery náisiúnta. Agus buineann muinte na tíre an tanavas, agus tanaf as an institute seo. Agus I gcónaí caithfidh mé sin a chur san áireamh. Ach is an éicear fad is seo hiiscint, chun is féidir leat scanner ar chinach agus níl aon rud socrathe rih ré maidir le úsáid an scanner. Níl sé sásúil in éacair. Agus tá an aire chun bhachna bhí ana bhar an cheist go léir agus bháil an bhuichas gháil an CNAG agus a fórnaí AG is Shahamach. Just want to say at the outset that the National Gallery is a very important national institution. People from across the country derive great joy and benefit from it, hosts many treasures. But it is incomprehensible that they would have proceeded under a digitisation scheme to purchase a scanner and not have organised in advance how that scanner would be deployed in terms of a lead-lined room and so on. And that is not acceptable. Controller and Auditor General, is my understanding, has unearthed this. I think it should be examined fully by the Public Accounts Committee when we have that committee established. It simply isn't good enough. And the gallery has to answer for this, and those responsible have to answer for it. And since 1998, the National Gallery of Ireland has had an X-ray facility, so a film, a darkroom, and wet processing facilities for researching the materials and techniques of its collection. And between 2012 and 2013, the old X-ray equipment, which was housed in a lead-lined room, was decommissioned in preparation for the NGI's Master Development Plan to accommodate major on-site changes and infrastructural works. The intention was always to reinstate the X-ray facility, but to move to a digital solution. And what happened here, of course, a scheme was developed, a cultural digitisation scheme. The NGI, National Gallery of Ireland, purchased a digital X-ray system, valued at 124,000, but quite clearly from the annual report hadn't worked out how it was going to deploy it and how it was going to locate it, and began discussions with the OPW after the purchase, looking at suitability of locations and something. It's completely unacceptable. People are right to be angry about it. And the Controller and Auditor General, as I say, had a key role in that. That said, I think it's also important that stories of this kind and events of this kind are irate, make people very irate, make people very angry. But we also have to take on board the fact that there has been a lot of good projects. It doesn't reflect the full picture of public expenditure on many, many worthy projects in this country. And one only has to look at the number of schools that we've built over the last number of years, reservoirs, waterworks. There's example after example where funding has come in on budget and on time. I've listed these school buildings before, from Edwin Rice College, Dublin, to Tradition Academy, Mallow, and so forth. The old Connacht Woodbrook Water Supply Scheme, Windmill Hill Reservoir, Kilkenny City Regional Water Supply Project, all good projects delivered well and in the interests of people. Fitzgibbon Street Garda Station, for example, in the Justice Area, fit for purpose accommodation. Walter Scott House, which will accommodate up to 900 Garda personnel from the Garda National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and then all the various roads from Castle Baldwin right to Listowel. So there's an overall picture here, but the House in general needs to focus on the specific, yes.
Taoiseach, your time is up. Thank you. Deputy MacDonald, please.
Yes, well, let's do that then, will we? Because if you're citing Fitzgibbon Street, Garda Station, as an example of efficiency and delivery, I'm afraid you've chosen a bad example. That took years and years and years to be delivered. I resisted it's in my constituency. I resisted in my opening remarks citing the Children's Hospital, but I now feel moved to do so. Because that, you see, is the example of the type of incompetence and waste that we've seen writ large. But it has its foundations, I believe, in a government culture of utter disregard for public money. And that's reflected, Taoiseach, if I might say so, in the response that you've given to me. You've said all of this is incomprehensible, it's not acceptable, it's not good enough, and then somebody else has to answer for it. I value the National Gallery and they have to do their job and give their account. But you're the Taoiseach.
Thank you.
I asked, was this matter raised at Cabinet? I want to know what you as Taoiseach and what the government is going to do about this instance and other instances of waste.
Taoiseach, please.
I shouldn't say this, but to be fair, members of your movement have always valued art down through the years in different ways. I appreciate your close scrutiny on the National Gallery, but could I also say that the politicians in this House cannot be responsible, I genuinely say this, for how individual agencies or the gallery or an arts centre procure and deliver. We create boards. Boards are established by legislation. There is responsibilities here on those who decide on these things. That's just generally said. But we politically also, and you say let's have the debate. I mean, I can remember it was a Deputy Osnodig, 50,000 of toner cartridges. That showed a tremendous focus on value for money, didn't it? 50,000 euros worth of cartridges. That's expenditure in this House. So before you throw stones, it's 120 here, wrong. It's 120, it's crazy. You should never buy a scanner. No, the other point I would make is this.
Now, when your
Today
point
I'm
time is
publishing
up, Taoiseach, we
a
move to
report.
Deputy Ivana Bacik of the Labour Party.
the
Deputy
Project
Ivana,
Eagle.
Taoiseach,
How
your
much?
time is up. Thank you. Deputy Ivana Bacik.
7 million? No, because
Deputy.
you'll be in hot and heavy for the next
Taoiseach.
inquiry.
Thank
which
you,
will cost us another
Taoiseach.
tenner.
Deputy Ivana Bacik.
Taoiseach, yesterday marked the 3rd anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And at this time, we remember all those who've lost their lives, their homes, their families in the brutal war that has ensued. We must reaffirm our solidarity with the people of Ukraine at this time. And Taoiseach, on this sad anniversary, US President Trump has joined with Belarus and North Korea at the United Nations, siding with the dictator Vladimir Putin and voting against a resolution condemning Russia's brutal war in Ukraine. A dark day for the United Nations, an extraordinary change of policy for the US. They are turning their backs on European democracies. Taoiseach, while the US goes rogue, at this time we in Ireland must stand firm against despots and against warmongers. And we in Labour have welcomed your commitment to continued solidarity with Ukraine in the face of the Russian aggressor. But I ask that you now take this opportunity to condemn both President Putin and President Trump, because the US vote yesterday was a crude reminder of the dark threat to our international rules-based order. Putin has effectively received an endorsement from the US, despite his illegal war. And in the Middle East, I think we are all very conscious that Netanyahu is flagrantly breaching international law, with the brutal bombardment and siege of Gaza and with tanks from Israel now in the West Bank, in the occupied West Bank. So at this time we must maintain our support for international law, for peacekeeping, for humanitarianism, for political and not military solutions to end global conflict. Taoiseach, we understand that proposals are being brought to Cabinet next month to end the triple lock here at home. And this alarming proposed change appears to be a pet project of yours, because over several years now you've sought different ways to remove or undermine the triple lock. And Taoiseach, we're very concerned that ending the triple lock will have an inherent impact on our military neutrality. It would open the door for members of our defence forces to participate in foreign conflicts that lack the protection of the blue beret, that lack the protection of a United Nations mandate, and that would compromise our neutrality. Now, you've denied that was the case in the past, but if that is so, why is this being proposed? Taoiseach, in a changing world, of course we do need to discuss Ireland's defence and security, and we know that military neutrality comes at a cost. But our defence forces are desperately under-resourced. And as the former line minister, you must be embarrassed that members of the Defence Forces have reported having to sleep in their cars because they could not afford to rent a home on their salary. So why not afford decent pay and conditions to those who are defending our country? Why not act now to address the recruitment and retention crisis in the Defence Forces and invest in our defence infrastructure? The reality is that the triple lock, with or without it, Ireland is highly vulnerable to attack and cyber attack. Closer alignment with NATO wouldn't have changed that, but proper investment would. So Taoiseach, I'm asking you, do you condemn President Trump for his siding with Russia, his betrayal of Ukraine and of European democracy? And would you commit
Deputy
now
Taoiseach.
to retaining the triple lock and
Thank you,
addressing
Deputy.
Irish
Your time is
security
up.
by investing in our defence forces?
Taoiseach.
I wonder, Deputy, do you reflect on the absolute contradictions within your presentation? You're asking me to condemn President Putin and President Trump, yet in the very same presentation you're suggesting they should continue to have a freeze on Ireland's participation in peacekeeping. It's exactly your proposition now. It's exactly what you've said. Because the reason we have consistently said that the triple lock needs to change is that the powers on the Security Council shouldn't be able to stop or veto Ireland's participation in the peacekeeping mission. It has absolutely nothing to do with military neutrality, as is sort of asserted time and time again in this House. Nothing. it's a very pragmatic and sensible decision to take. We should control the destiny of how we participate in peacekeeping, and we should control those decisions in this House and the government of the day. And we have a very honourable tradition of peacekeeping in this country, and I pay tribute to members of the Defence Forces. And over the last number of years, we have significantly increased pay and conditions, which I think was unfair of you not to acknowledge that. Over a year ago now, we introduced, for example, free secondary care for every member of the Defence Forces. We've increased starting pay in the Defence Forces such that it is significantly better now than many starting pay of many other public servants or indeed people in the private sector. And again, I'd invite you to study that. We've significantly increased allowances, such as doubling of the patrol duty allowance last year, a very significant move in respect of our naval services. And last year, for the first time since 2017, we turned the corner in having a net increase of recruitment into our defence forces. We need much more, of course. And we've invested hugely in barracks, in accommodation, in the naval base, and we'll continue to invest hugely. And there will be a master plan for every barracks, and indeed for Baldonnel and for the naval service itself. And we do have to increase defence capability in this country. We have to do it in a progressive way, in a way that makes sense from a procurement capacity. So, I mean, all sorts of talk goes on about doubling this and doubling that. Bottom line is we have to do it in an organised, in the spirit of the moment, value for money way. It's not about throwing money at the defence issue or the capability issue. Procurement takes time. We have to assess what we need, what the vulnerabilities are. Cybersecurity is one key one. Subsea cables is another. And we're investing in our capability and our resilience in that respect. In terms, we are facing potentially tectonic changes in the global world order. On the other hand, and the European Union has resolved, and I agree with this, to continue engagement with the United States government and administration, which is crucial to the Europe-US relationship and to the Ireland-US relationship.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
And President Macron's visit yesterday, I thought, was a positive step in the right direction in that regard.
Well, Taoiseach, I'm glad you acknowledge the need for greater investment in the Defence Forces. I think we're all very aware of that. But on the triple lock, you continue to say that retaining the requirement for UN mandate leaves us at the mercy of Russia or China having a veto. But you know that the legislation underpinning the triple lock enables a UN mandate to give authorisation for the General Assembly and not the Security Council. You know that. And further, Taoiseach, it may be imperfect, but the UN is the only legitimate international agency capable of authorising multilateral peacekeeping missions in which we would want to see Irish troops serving. It is imperfect. All of us want to see its processes reformed, but nobody, including you, has offered any practical alternative. And I quote you yesterday, speaking at an international conference and saying, for a small country like Ireland, the international rules-based order is ultimately the only basis for our security, and commending Ukraine for fighting to uphold the principles of the UN Charter. The UN represents an international rules-based order. President Trump is intent on breaking up that international rules-based order, and for that he should be condemned by all democratic leaders in Europe, because he's turned his back on us with his vote at the United Nations yesterday.
Sorry, first of all, I'm absolutely committed and have articulated the need for a multilateral-based, rules-based order. That is, and the point I was making yesterday is small open economies or small states like Ireland, our ultimate security actually isn't in optimal defence capability, it's in the rules-based order. That is our security, our ultimate security. That is why we support Ukraine, because its territorial integrity was violated, sovereignty, UN Charter breached and violated as well. So there's no equivocation there, and I took the opportunity yesterday to reassert that. Bottom line is, during our time, and by the way, that General Assembly notion is just a notion, doesn't happen. It's always a Security Council resolution that underpins peacekeeping missions. And we had significant challenges during our time on the Security Council in respect even of humanitarian corridors, keeping them open to northwest Syria, keeping them open to Tigray, for humanitarian corridors to get vital aid to people in a war zone. So we got first-hand experience of the challenges of the modern day reality on the Security Council.
Deputy Cian O'Callaghan, Social Democrats.
There are now 14,864 people living in homeless emergency accommodation. This includes 4,510 children who are growing up without a home. Almost every month these numbers climb higher, but record levels of homelessness are now so commonplace the numbers no longer seem to shock. They rarely appear on the front page of newspapers. This is because the numbers don't tell the stories of the thousands of people whose lives are being damaged and destroyed. But last night, thanks to some very good, excellent public service journalism by Katie Hannon, we heard some of those distressing stories. Chloe Coffey is living in a homeless hub with her 4-year-old son, Jackson. Jackson has complex medical needs. He has already had 2 surgeries and a third one is planned in a month. If nothing changes, Jackson will have open heart surgery and be discharged back into this hub. Taoiseach, there are 300 people living in this hub, including 220 children. It is clearly not a suitable place for a very sick child to be living. So why are Chloe and her son trapped there? Taoiseach, Lisa is also living at the same hub, Houben House, with her 4 children, aged between 9 months and 7 years of age. Lisa is hugely concerned about the mental health impacts on her children. Their attendance at school is already being impacted, and she's afraid that they will get depressed. Taoiseach, the homeless crisis is a national scandal. Children and families are not just spending short periods of time in these hubs, some can be there for up to 4 years. The damage that this is doing, especially to children, is enormous and can be lifelong. Instead of improving the situation, it's actually getting worse. Where is the urgency to address this? 2 of the families who were featured last night were made homeless when they were evicted from private rental accommodation. We know that this is the biggest cause of homelessness. Yet in the midst of this crisis, the government won't improve security for renters. Taoiseach, can you explain why a child who's scheduled for open heart surgery is living in a homeless hub? What can you say to the thousands of families in emergency homeless accommodation, some of whom have been there for years? What is the government doing to address this disaster? And will you bring Ireland in line with other European countries and introduce a ban on no-fault evictions?
Well, I thank you, Deputy, for raising the issue. And it is not acceptable that so many people in our society are in emergency housing accommodation, and particularly children. And in respect of children or indeed families with significant medical issues, there's recourse to the local authority in that situation to prioritise the housing of that family. And particularly, I don't know the background of each individual case, and I didn't see the programme last evening, but particularly in a case where a child is facing open heart surgery. I mean, there are opportunities and there's a priority there for the local authority to prioritise a case like that. And indeed, medical cases do get prioritised by local authorities across the country. The bottom line is we have to increase significantly supply. Banning no-fault eviction sounds great, but it actually would have a negative impact, I believe, in rental supply ultimately, and would lead to less supply. And one of the challenges we have is to try and get many more people back into the rental market who are either doing short-term lets or doing other alternative forms of letting as opposed to secure long-term rental to people on the housing list. And that is an issue that the government is addressing and will be addressing in terms of legislation, and that has to be addressed. So the supply issue is key, both in terms of the private rental market, but also in terms of public housing and social housing. Now, without question, there's been a dramatic increase in the number of social houses in the country over the last 4 years. It's been quite exponential in comparison to anything that happened, I think, since going back to the early 2000s, and indeed going back further. And there will be a very strong focus and a continuing focus on social housing. I mean, since July of 2020, about 42,000 social homes have been added to the social housing stock. And last year, in Q3, I think we saw the highest level of delivery of new build social housing since 1975. That is the key. I opened the facility in Mallow last week, where 13 families with Focus Housing, or Focus Ireland Housing Association provided, people who came off the housing list, and some who would have been homeless. And about 12,000 social homes, if you add in acquisition and leasing, was delivered in 2023. And there's many, many more social houses in the pipeline for 2024, starting in 24, coming through into 2025. And I believe we need a consistent new build of about 10,000 per annum to deal with the emergency housing and homeless situation. To make sure that the time that people spend in an emergency home is as short as possible.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Your time is up. Deputy O'Callaghan.
Taoiseach, I appreciate that you didn't see the programme, but if you had, you would have seen that the family in question had applied for medical priority and had been refused. And indeed, that's under appeal. And they're in the same situation that thousands of families with real medical needs aren't able to get their housing needs met, and indeed don't get prioritisation. You dismiss banning no-fault evictions as if this couldn't work or can't work, when in fact it's the norm in most European countries. Not only is it the norm in most European countries, countries with much larger rental sectors than ours, successful rental sectors with lots of supply, have good rent regulation and good security for renters. So, of course, it could be done here. And when you talk about increase in social housing numbers, at the same time there's been a dramatic increase in homelessness over the last few years. So I repeat my question. What specifically are you going to do to turn this around? Because month after month the situation is getting worse. We need new action from the government. Will you ban no-fault evictions? If not, what are you going to do?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
I think we need to, first of all, we have provided a range of measures in terms of security for renters over the last number of years. And I think you should acknowledge that as well. And of course, and that's not referring to bringing in the tax credit for renters as well, which is an additional help in what is a very, very difficult situation for renters in terms of cost and prices. In terms of the fundamental way to deal with emergency accommodation is to build a consistent level of social housing that can take people off the housing list and out of homelessness. That is, to me, the key. And historically, we are at levels now that we haven't been at for quite a long time. But it's going to take a bit of time for that to have the impact, the cumulative impact that we want. And we will continue through new social house bills, also in terms of leasing and acquisitions. And combined, we should try and get to about 12,000 in 2025, which will help in terms of Housing First, for example, that many approved housing bodies operate. That's a very effective mechanism to get people out of the emergency housing situation.
Dr. Toibin.
Taoiseach, the Oireachtas spent €808,000 on a printer that couldn't fit into the print room. It then spent €230,000 fixing that room so they can actually fix it in. And then it spent €12,000 storing the printer before they could actually get it into the print room. Your government spent €22 million on ventilators that never worked, and then 50 grand to actually store those ventilators. 100 electric buses were bought and never moved an inch for 18 months because someone forgot about the electric chargers. €300 million has been spent on Metro North, and not a shovel has been put into the ground. Obviously, €2.5 billion has actually been spent on compensation on adverse incidents or mistakes that have happened in a health service over the last 10 years. And we've seen the cyber attacks so far cost the state €100 million. We'll need to spend another €657 million on upgrades with regards to the security there. And remember, you were in the Department of the Taoiseach at the time. You spent €15 million on Peadar that particular year, when the National Cyber Security Centre got €5 million for its total budget. An incredible situation. So we've had the Children's Hospital, €2.5 billion. We've had 67 vacant OPW properties, 4,000 empty local authority homes, all in a national housing crisis. Bike sheds, security huts, WRC walls, the Great Wall of Tara, €7 million in an Arts Council IT system that never materialised. And now we have the latest instalment of your government's waste, and that's the National Gallery has bought a scanner for €120,000. We were told that it was essential enough to buy, but not essential enough to actually switch on. And for 7 years, the National Gallery searched for a room to fit this. Actually, Columbus found the New World faster than the National Gallery actually found a room to fit this particular scanner in. It's absolutely incredible here, Taoiseach. There is a significant pattern. We have citizens, to the pin of their collar, in terms of the taxes that they're being charged, the charges that they're paying on a daily basis, and yet we have this government who are incinerating their taxpayers' money on a daily basis on projects that are going way over budget, and nobody's been held to account. People are sick and tired of it, Taoiseach. People are furious with this. It's an incredible situation, and there's no doubt now we're going to have a review, that there could be an investigation, that we'll have a blizzard of words, but a drought of any real action, Taoiseach. And this is the real frustration. I'm quite amazed that you've come into this chamber here today and basically outsourced responsibility for government waste. You've basically said it's somebody else's fault. How could the government be held to account in relation to it? Well, it's that culture that you have articulated today that is at the heart of the fiasco factory that your government has become. And my question to you is, how do you make it stop,
Thank
Taoiseach?
you, Deputy. Thank you, Taoiseach.
You mentioned at the outset 800,000 by the Oireachtas. That's your responsibility, just as much as anybody in this side of the House. Sorry, no, I'm not. It's the Oireachtas. That's your responsibility. What have you done about it? What have you done about it? We created the commission for the Oireachtas. You either take it on board or you don't. That's a matter for the Oireachtas in its entirety. It doesn't justify it. It was wrong. But don't try and pin everything on the government. Now, the other point is this. This government was not in government in 2017, by the way. Just a small little fact that has passed you by. We're now responsible for something that... I'm not blaming the government then. It's a perfectly normal thing to say we need to replace old equipment with new equipment. What's inexcusable is that those in the National Gallery at the time decided to procure this without figuring out how they were going to deploy it, what room were they going to put into. It's unacceptable, Deputy. That's why we have the Controller and Auditor General to highlight, unearth these issues. And that's why the Public Accounts Committee in this House is there to interrogate and to hold people to account in respect of unacceptable practices and behaviour. And that is the bottom line here. You mentioned cyber security attacks, as if the person or the group, very often criminal organisations, or some. Sorry, I didn't interrupt you, Deputy. You have a great habit. You have a great habit of interrupting.
Deputy,
I have not interrupted
Deputy.
you. And again, you're trying to. You do it all the time. Of course, it's a tactic of yours, which you learned from your former colleagues. But anyway, it's a well-worn campaigning tactic. But if I could make the point. You mentioned cyber security attacks as if it's the recipient of those attacks that's responsible for the expenditure. I mean, come on. Let's have some balance in the debate. I don't blame the HSE for the cyber attack. There may have been vulnerabilities. Maybe we could be stronger. I blame the Conti Group, who did that attack on the Irish people through a cyber attack on our entire health service in the middle of COVID. I don't blame public servants for that, who worked extremely hard to deal with it in the interests of the Irish people. Third-level colleges who are subject and vulnerable and who've been attacked by some of these criminal enterprises. I blame the criminal enterprises, Deputy. I don't blame a particular university that has been attacked via cyber. And these cyber attacks are attacking private sector, they're attacking public sector, and since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, cyber attacks have grown exponentially across Europe. They're connected, they're a form of hybrid warfare on those countries who may disagree with the manner and nature of that attack. And it's wrong that you should just neatly try and bundle cyber attacks and the cost of them into the broader, legitimate issue of value for money and public expenditure, which has to be at the core of everything we do.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
Taoiseach, personal responsibility is the engine of accountability. And you don't have too far to look for where personal responsibility exists. In the private sector, in tens of thousands of businesses every day, people in their own work have to work to a certain standard. They have to make sure that they don't waste money, and they have to meet the objectives of their particular business. And if they don't, there's a cost. They could be moved sideways, it could be a reduction in their salary, or they could lose their job. But that cost is a catalyst to actual change in terms of accountability. Now, you have proven beyond shadow of a doubt that you will not accept responsibility. This government could be transformative in terms of accountability. It could actually enforce accountability from the top echelons of the civil service. It could write it into their contracts that they have a responsibility to mind the public purse. You could write it into their contracts that there's an actual financial cost to them, potentially losing their jobs if they don't do their job.
Thank you.
You could actually change the situation whereby citizens are not waking up every single morning to this absolute disgusting waste of money that's happening in our country. But you won't. You will spend your time blaming everybody else but yourself.
Your time is up. Thank you.
I reject that entirely. And by the way, I don't accept your analysis of private sector and accountability. That's a well-worn trope in this House. But anyone who looks at the private sector, as far as I can see, anybody who's ever in difficulty somehow gets sidelined with a huge sweetheart deal in the private sector. That seems to be the norm. So don't be trying to make a false comparison between private sector accountability and public sector accountability. I've never bought into it. I've never accepted it. Okay? But what I will accept is there absolutely has to be value for money. There has to be a very vigorous and forensic analysis of all spending carried out by the state. That is legitimate, and that is proper, and that is right. And that's why we have the Controller and Auditor General. That's why we have the public accounts. But also, it's why we do have the checks and balances. I looked at a list of codes of practice, of various circulars that have issued to every department and to every agency. They're all there, Deputy. But we do need better delivery, better implementation by people on the ground working in various agencies in respect. Either do that or abolish every single agency in the country and say we're going to do it.
Time is up.
I mean, that's what you're kind of saying here.
Taoiseach, your
if you
time
take
is
this
up.
logical conclusion, that's what you're actually saying.
Taoiseach,
And by the way,
through the
Chair, I think your Oireachtas needs to reflect on itself as well.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
Because behaviour in this House has cost the taxpayer a lot of money as well. And I saw that programme last week in respect of what happened to
I now have an announcement.
at the foot of this House.